Now, police in Kenya have opened fire during fresh clashes with protesters in the capital, Nairobi. Police also used whips on the protesters. Demonstrations were there and due to be held across the country to mark the anniversary of pro-democracy protests back in 1990.
Kenya is burning. Not in theory, in fire, blood, and ash. Bodies lie in the streets. Forests are vanishing in smoke. A blogger is dead. The president is silent. And the youth are rising. What happened to this once stable nation? And why is everything collapsing at once? Let's find out. It began with a scream, then a shot, then another. On June 25, 2024, Kenya crossed a line it cannot uncross. Police in Nairobi opened fire on unarmed demonstrators protesting the finance bill. Bodies dropped, blood pooled, and the nation that once prided itself on democratic progress cracked in real time, under the weight of rage and betrayal. But this wasn't an isolated act of state violence. It was a rupture, a culmination, a visible wound from years of pressure building beneath the surface. In the months that followed, protests spread like wildfire, not just in anger, but in coordination. From Nairobi to Kisumu, Eldoret to Mombasa, the youth rose with slogans that shook parliament. We are tired. Ruto must go. Justice or nothing. By July 2025, over 126 people were dead, according to human rights groups. The government disputes the figures, but video evidence, social media live streams, and survivor testimonies tell a different story. One of bullets in broad daylight, of vans pulling protesters off the streets, and of families waiting outside morgues with no answers. The final spark that reignited national fury came with the death of Albert Ojwang, a young activist and blogger known for his sharp criticism of President Ruto's economic policies. Detained in June 2025 under suspicious circumstances, Ojwang's lifeless body was returned days later, bruised, broken, and silenced. His death wasn't just tragic, it was symbolic. It told Kenya's youth exactly what the system thought of their voices. Within hours, #Justice for Ojwang trended across the continent. Candlelight vigils became battlegrounds. Protesters were no longer just angry, they were done begging. The government's response? Curfews, censorship, and more bullets. Nairobi's central business district has now become an epicenter of conflict. Streets once buzzing with traffic, and vendors now echo with chants and gunshots. In some neighborhoods, citizens have formed defensive barricades using burnt cars and shipping containers to keep police out. Drones hover overhead. Undercover officers in plainclothes blend into the crowd, arresting suspected organizers. Some disappear for days. Some never return. Yet despite this crackdown, the movement is only growing. It's no longer about one bill or one death. It's about the broken contract between the government and its people. Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, another fire burns, this time quite literally. Mount Kenya, the Aberdars, and the Mau Forest Complex, Kenya's ecological crown jewels, are engulfed in flames. Since early 2025, over 1,357 hectares of land have been lost to fire, in what experts call the worst wildfire season in the country's history. But few are noticing. With so much focus on the political unrest, the ecological destruction unfolding in silence has gone largely ignored. Yet these two infernos, one in the streets, the other in the wild, are not just parallel. They are connected. One reflects institutional collapse, the other exposes the cost of ignoring it. And still, the president speaks in fragments, half apologies, vague denials, recycled promises, none of which can put out what's already ablaze. Kenya's crisis is no longer a future warning. It is a present reality. The youth are in the streets, the trees are on fire, and the rest of the world has just started to notice. But what exactly caused these wildfires? And why are Kenya's forests disappearing under our noses? While Kenya's cities erupt in chants and gunfire, a quieter catastrophe is devouring the countryside. It crackles beneath the surface, rises through the treetops, and turns centuries-old forests into ash within hours. Since the beginning of 2025, Kenya has witnessed over 180 wildfire incidents, affecting the heart of its most vital ecological zones. And unlike the protests, these flames don't make global headlines. they simply burn in silence. The scale of destruction is staggering. In just the first half of the year, fires have consumed more than 1,357 hectares of forest, from the glacial heights of Mount Kenya to the dense green walls of the Mau Forest Complex. The Aberdare Ranges, once known for their misty biodiversity and crystal rivers, now bear patches of blackened earth and smoke-blurred skies. What makes this wildfire season especially alarming is that it didn't come out of nowhere. The signs were all there, but no one listened. In 2024, Kenya experienced one of its wettest years on record due to unusual El Niño effects. Torrential rainfall saturated the country, feeding an explosive growth of vegetation. The hills turned lush, the valleys thick with green underbrush. But then came the dry season of 2025, hotter, drier, and windier than anything in recent memory. The same vegetation that once symbolized renewal had transformed into fuel. A spark was all it took. But climate wasn't the only match. Human hands played their part. In rural areas bordering forests, slash and burn farming techniques remain common. Charcoal production continues to destroy acres of woodland, often under the nose or protection of corrupt officials. Farmers clear land using fire. Poachers set flames to drive animals into traps. In some cases, desperate communities light fires as a political cry for help, burning what they believe the government has already abandoned. And yet, the government's response mirrors its political reaction, delayed, fragmented, and underfunded. The Kenya Forest Service, KFS, has sounded the alarm repeatedly, but they're overwhelmed. Firefighting teams are small, equipment is scarce. Some battles are fought with nothing more than twigs and jerry cans. Entire hillsides are left undefended as flames leap from canopy to canopy. Community volunteers have stepped in, but their bravery is no substitute for a national emergency response plan. At Mount Kenya, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the damage is especially painful. Fires have not only destroyed rare alpine ecosystems, but also threatened the mountain's glacier-fed rivers, which provide water to millions downstream. Tourists once hiked these trails. Now they stare into charcoal pits where ancient cedar trees once stood. Experts warn that unless Kenya implements long-term climate resilience policies, this will become the new normal. The dry season is no longer a few months of heat, it is a period of crisis. The country needs early warning systems, aerial firefighting capabilities, strict enforcement against illegal land clearing, and robust local training. But above all, it needs political will. That will is currently missing. Instead, attention remains locked on political headlines, as if environmental collapse is a side issue. But here's the truth. When forests burn, futures burn. The loss isn't just ecological, it's economic, agricultural, and generational. Wildlife habitats vanish, water sources shrink, air quality plummets, and the children of tomorrow inherit a land scorched by today's neglect. Kenya isn't just losing its trees, it's losing its natural defenses. In a region already vulnerable to climate shocks, these forests are water towers, oxygen banks, and weather regulators. Their destruction brings consequences that no protest can reverse and no government can ignore. So if the fires are this severe, why does it feel like no one is doing anything? Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. By now it's clear, Kenya's fires, both political and environmental, did not come from nowhere. They were made possible by something even more dangerous than drought or dissent, a system designed to delay, deny, and decay. Look closer, and you'll see it's not just flames tearing through the nation, it's the failure of governance itself. Year after year, crisis after crisis, Kenya's institutions have treated warning signs not as alarms, but as background noise. And now, that complacency is costing the country everything. When wildfires erupted across Mount Kenya and the Aberdares, what was the first response? Not action, not a national broadcast, not an emergency fund release. Instead, it was silence, an eerie pause that has become routine. The Kenya Forest Service had been raising red flags since early 2024 about dry fuel buildup, unregulated grazing, and illegal burning practices. Their recommendations? Ignored. Budget requests? Slashed. Meanwhile, government officials continued awarding timber concessions near protected forests, quietly feeding the very crisis they now claim to be fighting. But it's not just environmental agencies facing systemic paralysis. The police, too, are broken, not just in their brutality, but in their very purpose. They don't act as a buffer between the people and power. They act as the last line of defense for a government too brittle to face its citizens honestly. That's why protests end in coffins, not conversations. That's why you can burn an entire forest or demand justice for a slain activist and be met with the same hollow phrase, "We're looking into it." What makes this dysfunction even more dangerous is that it's not accidental. Kenya's governance model has, over the years, evolved into a reaction machine, not a prevention system. Leaders only respond when the crisis is too loud to ignore, when the cameras are rolling, or when protesters break past the gates of parliament. Until then, silence, denial, spin. And this culture of reaction trickles down. Local administrations, unsure of national priorities, are paralyzed. Agencies tasked with preparedness are constantly underfunded and over-politicized. Climate task forces exist on paper, but rarely coordinate with forestry teams. The Ministry of Environment works in silos, and no one, not a single governing body, has laid out a comprehensive, proactive response plan that fuses climate, economy, and civil unrest into one national emergency doctrine. It's not just a lack of will, it's a deliberate fragmentation that ensures no one is ever fully responsible. Meanwhile, corruption acts like a slow-burning accelerant. Money meant for water catchment preservation disappears. Contracts to modernize emergency services are handed to cronies with no experience. Equipment sits idle because someone skimmed from the procurement budget. And when journalists try to report it, they're silenced. When citizens ask questions, they're told to remain calm. But calm is not coming. Because when institutions become unreliable, the people create their logic. That's why protesters don't just hold banners, they burn buildings. That's why in rural areas, some farmers set intentional fires, not out of ignorance, but to get attention. Destruction, in a system this broken, is often the only language that registers. The terrifying truth is that Kenya is not short of knowledge. It has experts, it has scientists, it has courageous young people proposing solutions every day. What it lacks is a government brave enough to listen before the sky turns black. So now we face the real question: who benefits from this chaos? If the system isn't working for the people, then who exactly is it working for? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. If systems are failing and citizens are dying, then why does nothing change? Why does the government respond with force instead of reform, with silence instead of solutions? The answer is uncomfortable, but in Kenya's case, increasingly obvious. There are people, networks, interests, elites who benefit from the chaos. The flames that consume the country are not just a tragedy. For some, they're an opportunity. Let's begin with the protests. The finance bill that ignited the initial outrage wasn't some bureaucratic error, it was a calculated move. At a time when inflation was sky high and citizens were barely surviving, the state attempted to pass new taxes that would hurt the very poorest while preserving privileges for the wealthiest. Why? Because the system isn't designed to serve the majority. It's designed to protect entrenched political and business interests. In the wake of protest chaos, government allies secured emergency contracts, logistics, surveillance, and police equipment worth billions. Some politicians even benefited from backroom land sales in areas cleared by protest violence. Behind the scenes, prolonged unrest gave cover for controversial asset transfers, shady procurement deals, and budget diversions under the guise of security. It's not incompetence, it's intentional exploitation of disorder. Now shift your gaze to the forests. Why have wildfires been met with such weak responses? Because the longer they burn, the more convenient they become for certain actors. Burned forest land is easier to privatize. When legal protection lapses due to emergency status, previously restricted zones become ripe for exploitation. Timber barons and illegal land developers are quietly circling what's left of Mount Kenya's periphery, filing claims and lobbying for development permits, while the nation is distracted by political unrest. In some cases, fires are suspected to be deliberately set by these same profiteers. Once the land is cleared, it's repurposed into charcoal farms, resorts, agricultural plots, or private estates. Satellite data has shown suspicious patterns, fires beginning along known illegal logging corridors, spreading outward in unnaturally uniform directions. And yet no one is held accountable. Why? Because those responsible are deeply connected to political patrons. The corruption is layered. Some environmental officials are paid to look the other way. Local administrators receive kickbacks for emergency mismanagement. Politicians exploit crisis headlines to demand new loans, which are later siphoned. And as this continues, Kenya loses more than trees. It loses the very public trust that binds nations together. It's not just fire that spreads in times like these. Disinformation thrives. Anonymous online accounts flood social media with conspiracy theories, deflecting blame from the government and shifting it onto foreign actors or radical protesters. State-linked influencers mock climate scientists. Activists are labeled insurgents. Protesters are painted as enemies of progress. And meanwhile, those truly benefiting, contractors, developers, cronies, continue extracting value from the very wreckage they helped create. But here's the darkest part. The longer the crisis continues, the easier it is to normalize. When violence becomes routine, when forests vanish without public mourning, when each death feels like just another headline, the profiteers win. They don't need public support, just public exhaustion. Still, not everyone is asleep. Grassroots networks, environmental defenders, rogue whistleblowers, and student journalists have started connecting the dots. They're naming names, mapping land deals, releasing investigative reports. And slowly, the question is shifting from what is happening to who is responsible. Because this is no longer about survival, it's about exposure. And when exposure comes, even the most fireproof lies begin to melt. But is exposure enough? Can the people reclaim what's been stolen and rebuild what's been burned? That's the fight now. Let's end with that question. Every fire leaves behind two choices, rebuild or rot. And Kenya, standing knee-deep in ash, political, environmental, and moral, must now decide whether it will emerge renewed or remain broken. The rage in the streets and the smoke in the forests were not just moments of destruction. They were signals, warnings, and for many, they were the final confirmation that the social contract is dead. The government no longer governs with the consent of the governed. The institutions no longer protect, they punish. And nature itself, stripped of guardianship, has turned hostile. But amid this collapse, something extraordinary is beginning to happen. A counter-fire is spreading. Not one of violence, but of clarity. A fire of civic awakening. Young Kenyans, long dismissed as too online or apolitical, are now the architects of resistance. They have mobilized networks faster than any government task force. They have shared real-time protest footage, documented police violence, geolocated illegal burn sites, and uncovered corruption with the speed and precision of professionals. They don't trust official channels, so they've built their own. Telegram groups replace press briefings. TikTok videos outpace news stations. They are not waiting to be saved. They are becoming the saviors. And they're not alone. Farmers whose land was ravaged by fire are forming climate defense cooperatives, lobbying for reforestation funds and sustainable land rights. Displaced communities are banding together to demand compensation, not just aid. Even in urban centers, formerly disengaged middle-class Kenyans are speaking out, realizing that no gated community can shield them from a state on fire. Civil society groups, previously cautious, are growing bolder. They are suing government agencies for negligence, filing access to information petitions, partnering with international watchdogs to trace environmental crimes and state abuses. Some organizations are even working with global climate finance programs to bypass corrupt ministries and directly support community-led resilience projects. But rebuilding isn't just about activism, it's about vision. And that's where Kenya's biggest challenge lies. For real change to take root, Kenya must reimagine what leadership means. It must break from a legacy of patronage and paranoia and build a system where transparency isn't the exception, It's the foundation. Where environmental policy isn't reactionary, it's anticipatory. Where the youth aren't threats, they're stakeholders. That means instituting radical reforms, not cosmetic tweaks. Dismantling impunity in police ranks and holding commanders accountable for protester deaths. Declaring climate a national security priority with binding legislation, dedicated funds, and enforcement power. Reversing land grabs near burned forests and canceling development permits issued during the crisis. Creating new institutions, built with the input of youth, environmental experts, and marginalized communities. Of course, the regime will resist. Power never yields easily, and already there are signs of state attempts to co-opt, distract, and divide the movement. But this time feels different. The people are not simply angry, they're organized. They're not just demanding reform, they're building blueprints. Still, none of this guarantees a peaceful transition. History is full of uprisings that ended in compromise or collapse. Kenya's political elite are watching the clock, hoping the fury dies down, that fatigue wins, but that hope may be misplaced, because something deeper than protest is rising, a new political consciousness, a generation that won't be gaslit, won't be bought off, and won't be silenced. So the question is no longer whether Kenya will recover. The question is, whose Kenya will emerge from the rubble? Will it belong to the same families who have ruled for decades, who watched the country burn and called it progress? Let us know in the comment section. Will it belong to the children of smoke and chant, those who dared to imagine a different future and weren't afraid to fight for it? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.